Beyond Reason Radio.
Oh, it is back. I am back. Beyond Reason Radio is back. It's been a long time since we've done the show, Tom Benson. I've been doing PM Orlando, which comes on WFLA, this station, Monday through Friday, 5 to 6 p.m., which is a lot of fun. But as I started doing PM Orlando, by the way, if anyone doesn't know, as you should know, I mean, I'm on like every show on the station now. we were promoting the show this morning, and they're like, "You're on 3 shows today, Mike." I'm like, "Yeah, well, what can I say?" This is Michael Yaffee, your voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. But as I was doing PM Orlando, I would literally have people tell me, "You're not getting rid of Beyond Reason, are you? You're not going to stop doing Beyond Reason. We still want to hear Beyond Reason." So I'm like, well, I mean, I have to do it then.
The long form version.
Yeah. So the good thing about PM Orlando is really fun because we cover a lot of breaking news. We cover a lot of news in an hour. So it's faster pace. It's quick. We have news updates. We have news reported at the top of the bottom of the hour. And we get to the topics, and you have my commentary. Beyond Reason's a little different. If you haven't listened to the show before, Beyond Reason, we get a little bit more in depth and a little bit more of my commentary on what's going on. And we focus on things in the world that are beyond reason. So what we're going to do with Beyond Reason this year is we're going to focus on the week's news. So a lot of different things have happened this week, and that's what we're going to focus on. And it's kind of funny because one thing we're going to focus on is the State of the Union, which seems like it happened,
a month ago.
Like it was Tuesday, and it seems like it was forever ago.
I went to bed early that night. I was just tired, so I went to bed. But I woke up about midnight, and I looked at my email. And if I look at my notices from media emails, it was the worst speech ever. It was disjointed. It was not received well. Blah blah blah. And I said, "Oh boy." And I went back to bed. Got up the next morning, read on CNN and CBS that 76% of the people who watched it approved of the speech.
Anyone who thinks that speech was not well received and not delivered well and was just terrible is a moron. Because it really was a good speech. Even Democrats out there are having to admit that it was a good speech. Earlier this week in PM Orlando, I went through a bunch of headlines that day, the day after, and even from leftists, they were like, the euphoria from this speech won't last long. They were trying to spin it negatively, but they had to admit that it was a positive speech. And the day after that, I actually, by the way, Tom Benson, I never get to introduce you really in PM Orlando, even though you're there.
That's all right.
But I can introduce you today, Tom Benson. You're staying late tonight.
Yes.
Although I think on Friday night sometimes you have to anyway. But so how are you, Tom Benson?
I'm fine. That's my lot in life. I'm kind of there,
Well, I've been there. I know exactly how you feel. So
good to be here.
Yeah, so it's going to be a lot of fun. The day after the speech, the State of the Union speech earlier this week, this is the first thing we're really going to address today. I wrote a blog about how State of the Union Trump is the best Trump. Because a lot of times when it comes to Trump, you look at his approval ratings, most of them have him in the 40s, sometimes in the 30s. When you look at the Democrats, how much they won, how many House seats they won, and where they won, to say that Trump is automatically going to win re-election, to say that Trump is just the most popular president ever, to say that Trump doesn't have some problems is, I think, naive. I think Trump does have problems. But when it comes to Trump's problems, most people, it's not really that they're upset at his policies. I mean, the left, yes, the left is upset at his policies. But people in the middle, and even some conservatives, they're really upset more at his approach, his attitude, personality things. The scorched earth tactics against people even on the right. The personal attacks, the vindictiveness, the off-the-cuff stuff when he kind of rambles on and exaggerates the truth. That's the kind of stuff that really gets Trump in trouble. But for some reason, when Trump does these State of the Union speeches, it's like all of a sudden he's like, I need to be presidential. I need to actually understand. I actually understand where I am, how important this is, and I need to act presidential. And that's exactly what he did in that speech.
Well, the funny thing is that over the years, the presidents, and I assume that Trump does also, practice the speech before they actually get up there and deliver it.
Yeah.
So that's probably part of the reason. He gets in the demeanor. He gets focused,
Maybe.
He gets his game face on, so to speak.
Yeah, and when I bring stuff up like this, people say, I don't want Trump to fight. Well, Trump fights. That's what you like. I'm going to get to that in a second. But one thing I really liked about the State of the Union speech is you can tell that he sincerely loves this country. And he talked about American greatness. He really did. And it's refreshing to hear that. He talked about American greatness from our past, which shouldn't be refreshing to hear, but it is because so many people are bashing Americans' past now. They are. So many people on the left do that every day. Then he talked about people in our present that are great, that make America great. Mm-hmm. And then he talks about the potential of greatness in our future. It was really presidential. It was uplifting. And then he'll throw in kind of some personal anecdotes as he's reading the speech that make it seem like he's really sincere when he says this stuff. Whatever you think of Trump, he really does love the country. And I think he does. Now, here's a part. This was close to the end of the speech. And I remember watching this. I was watching this live. And I remember thinking to myself, first off, everybody was really enthralled with this part of the speech. You could tell it was having an effect on everybody in the room. So it shows how good it was. But I also started thinking to myself, imagine if Trump was like this all the time. Imagine if Trump literally acted like this all the time instead of some of the other stuff he does. I think his approval ratings would be through the roof, just like they were after the speech. I'm not saying Democrats aren't going to attack him. Democrats are going to attack no matter what. This is politics. Politics is inherently divisive by nature. But I think it was a better Trump. So I want to play this first cut. This is near the end of the speech where he really talks about American greatness. And this is a great example on why this is really good State of the Union speech this week.
When American soldiers set out beneath the dark skies over the English Channel in the early hours of D-Day 1944, they were just young men of 18 and 19 hurtling on fragile landing craft toward the most momentous battle in the history of war. They did not know if they would survive the hour. They did not know if they would grow old, but they knew that America had to prevail. Their cause was this nation and generations yet unborn. Why did they do it? They did it for America. They did it for us. Everything that has come since our triumph over communism, our giant leaps of science and discovery, our unrivaled progress towards equality and justice, all of it is possible thanks to the blood and tears and courage and vision of the Americans who came before. When American soldiers set out...
Oops, sorry. Yeah, that was it. There was... he actually talked more about that, but I didn't want to play the whole thing. I didn't want to play the whole thing, but don't throw an AOC in there. Don't ruin that great moment by accidentally throwing AOC. We'll get to an AOC cut in a sec. But that was a great part of the speech because he talked about American greatness from our past, from our veterans, from the people that came before. It's a positive way to show America. It's presidential. It was inherently presidential, and I think he's sincere when he says stuff like that. Now, that being said, people say, well, you just want Trump to be soft. You don't want him to fight. No, I want Trump to fight. In that speech, he was fighting. He was bold. He still put forward his policy ideas. He talked about the need for a wall. He talked about the need for a strong military. He talked about the need for some things I disagree with. He also talked about being against socialism. He talked about the need to ban partial birth abortion and third trimester abortions. These are bold things worth fighting for. Bold policy ideas worth fighting for, and he did it in his speech. But he did it in a way that wasn't petty, is the point I really want to make. It wasn't petty. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't personal attacks. it was focused instead of focusing on being against people and individuals, it was focused on being for specific policies and specific ideas. And that's what I really appreciated about it. And that's what I think is missing a lot of times in debates these days. One of the good things about this week is there actually has been a lot of focus on policies. You know, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes out with her Green New Deal, we're actually debating whether that's effective. I mean, we kind of make fun of it because it's a little out there and a little ridiculous, but it's still at least focused on policy instead of these personal attacks on Trump or personal attacks on these people or whatever. I think sometimes it's missing where we think fighting is just, we're so focused on who we're fighting against that we don't know what we're fighting for and what we're fighting against really sometimes. So I thought it was a really great speech. There are more parts of the speech we're going to get to. There was one part that really didn't get too much attention. Believe it or not, I thought it would get more attention. But I think it deserves a lot of attention because it was politically brilliant by the Trump administration. It has to do when he talked about ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We're going to get to that next and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. Back once again, I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. Your safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is a special edition of Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. By the way, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm posting stuff all the time. You can follow me at PMOWFLA. It's because I also host PM Orlando, which is on WFLA 5 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Catch the podcast of that on iHeartRadio. Search PM Orlando. Also catch the podcast of this, Beyond Reason Radio, and other Beyond Reason stuff. Just search Beyond Reason Radio on iHeartRadio. So we've been going over the week's news, and one of the biggest things, obviously, was Trump's State of the Union address. But another big thing was freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, has been making a lot of news. I have to give her credit on one thing. She is very good at drawing attention to herself. She's like Trump in that way, that she doesn't always say the smartest things, but she has this way of kind of getting the attention, and she's almost becoming a de facto leader in the Democrat Party because she's putting stuff out there. And the Democrats that are running for president right now, they all are coming out and supporting the Green New Deal, even before reading it. It's like she is setting the agenda. She is the Trump of the Democrat Party. It's really fascinating to watch all of this. So one thing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out with this week was a Green New Deal. But the other thing she talked about didn't get as much of attention, but it's something that Democrats have been saying. When we interviewed Andrew Gillum, when he was on the morning show, when he was running for governor, he said basically the same thing. This whole idea of abolishing ICE, they want to totally get rid of it and get rid of funding. Well, she talked about that at the Capitol earlier this week, the same day she put out the Green New Deal. This is what she said.
But we're here to say that an agency like ICE, which repeatedly and systematically violates human rights, does not deserve a dime. They do not deserve a dime. Until they can prove that they are honoring human rights, until they can make a good faith effort to expand and embrace immigrants, the immigrants in this nation that have always been a part and have always been a core element of American democracy, until they can prove good faith to an American ideal, they do not deserve any resources for their radical agenda.
It's funny how she says ICE is radical, when really abolishing ICE, I think, would be radical. It's so hard to take Democrats seriously when it comes to immigration because the Democrat leadership will come out and they'll say, well, we do need border security. And no, we're not for illegal immigration. But then it's like, okay, well, here's part of border security. Let's have a wall. Let's have some barriers. No, we can't have that. That's immoral. But you just said you support border security. Do you or not? okay, well, ICE is going to start, really collecting these people that shouldn't be here, that are illegal, undocumented immigrants, and deport them as they should be. Oh, no, that's immoral. That's against human rights. They have a right to be here if they're illegal? Why do they have a right to be here if they're illegal? They can't really explain that. It's not a human right. It just isn't. But President Trump really has a great response to this. This actually happened before AOC said this, but in terms of the whole ICE debate, President Trump took part of the State of the Union to talk about a particular ICE agent. And what he said, I mean, it's just politically brilliant. It's another reason why this State of the Union speech really was Trump at his best. Here it is.
We are joined tonight by one of those law enforcement heroes, ICE Special Agent Elvin Hernandez. When Elvin was a boy, he and his family legally immigrated to the United States from the Dominican Republic. At the age of 8, Elvin told his dad he wanted to become a special agent. Today, he leads investigations into the scourge of international sex trafficking. Elvin says that if I can make sure these young girls get their justice, I've really done my job. Thanks to his work and that of his incredible colleagues, more than 300 women and girls have been rescued from the horror of this terrible situation. And more than 1,500 sadistic traffickers have been put behind bars. Thank you, Robert. We will always support the brave men and women of law enforcement. And I pledge to you tonight that I will never abolish our heroes from ICE. Thank you.
So there you go. I mean, how do you respond to that negatively? The ICE agent is a legal immigrant himself. His family immigrated here legally. He wanted to become an ICE agent. They focus on human trafficking and drug trafficking. I mean, the Democrats keep ignoring the problem that comes with illegal immigration. There are problems, including what drug trafficking has done to this country in the opioid crisis. You know, a lot of people think the opioid crisis is just hospitals overprescribing. That was definitely a part of it, but now it really isn't. It's fentanyl coming over the border illegally. And what happened is these drug traffickers, they get caught at the point of entry, but they come over across all points of the border. They illegally bring these drugs here, and then they go to these sanctuary cities where you have vicious gangs and drug cartels in this country doing incredibly violent things and then spreading drugs across this country, hurting millions of Americans. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a real problem. I'm not making this stuff up. If you talk to people that work on the border, or you talk to people in law enforcement that have to deal with this on a daily basis, they'll tell you that these people are extremely dangerous. And yes, there are a lot of illegal immigrants who want to come here just for a better economic opportunity.
Who wouldn't want to come here?
Yeah, exactly. But we have to decide, okay, are we just going to let everyone in? You know, their solution, it comes to, okay, they don't want to have these detention centers. They don't want to have a wall. They don't want to deport illegal immigrants. And they don't understand. It's like, well, if we don't do these things, you're basically creating an incentive for more and more people to come here. Mm-hmm. And while during the recession, illegal immigration wasn't as much of a problem because the economy wasn't as good here, it's becoming more and more of a problem now, especially from the people in Central America. And they're coming here more often to the point where Border Patrol agents themselves in interviews have said this is the worst crisis they've seen in years. And instead of trying to really deal with this problem, you basically say, well, it's not a big deal. And so if we don't deal with this, because even a lot of the people in these caravans admit they're just here for economic opportunity. That's why they're coming here. They're not really going to get asylum. They're not really seeking asylum. They're using that, but they really just want the economic opportunity. There are literally millions of people in Central America living in poverty right now. All would probably want better economic opportunity and would love to get it here in the United States. Do we allow 6 million people to come here? If we just open up the borders, you're going to have a huge influx of people coming here. So you have the Trump administration actually trying to make an incentive. No, don't come here. And now Mexico, we're not the only country doing it. They say we're insensitive. Mexico is trying to stop this from happening because cities in Mexico are tired of the influx of the caravan. The Tijuana, they were tired of the influx of all these people in the caravans. You just can't have it. I understand why they want to come here, and I'm not unsympathetic to what they want and what situation they're in. But to act like the solution is, oh, okay, well, we'll just let them all in, that doesn't make sense. It's so hard to take AOC seriously when it comes to illegal immigration. It does. So the other thing that has come up recently when it comes to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is this debate over socialism. I got in a really stupid Facebook debate on this today. I don't know why I do this. I try not to respond to these people. But they get mad. Democrats on the left get mad because we call certain things out as socialist, and they say, well, it's not really socialist. Stop using the term socialist. They're democratic socialists. That's very different. And really, it's just a semantic argument. But this is something that the left has done to kind of put a smiley face on socialism. You call it democratic socialism, and all of a sudden it's utopia. It's not as bad. It's still the basic underlying economic theory. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next segment when we hear more from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about this as well. And we have a lot more to get to on the show today. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Your voice of reason here, Michael Yaffee, your voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We're on till 8 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. And, of course, you can get to the podcast at Beyond Reason Radio anywhere podcasts are available, especially in the iHeartRadio app. Just search Beyond Reason Radio. So we've been talking a little bit about the week's news. We're talking about the State of the Union. That was a big story. And, of course, the other big story was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. Now, speaking of the State of the Union, Trump decided to address the threat of socialism during the speech, and this is what he said.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
So it was really funny, actually, during that speech. The camera zoomed in on Bernie Sanders when that was going on. And he just looked grumpy, and he would sit there and he wouldn't clap. So every time this topic comes up, because when Venezuela fails or other socialist countries fail, we say, look, socialism is bad. And then the people say, well, that's not the socialism we're talking about. We're talking about democratic socialism. And, of course, I was calling the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, I was calling them socialist policies, and people get mad at me because they're not really socialist policies. Well, yes, they are, and I'm going to explain why they are in a second. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on Meet the Press Daily with Chuck Todd on MSNBC, and they were kind of going through, what does democratic socialism mean, and can it align with capitalism? And I thought I would go through this because it's very interesting, her take and how they try to spin a lot of it. Here it is.
The president spent a lot of time on using the S word. Socialism and socialist. It was a not too subtle, I don't know whether it's a dig or a enhancement. I'll let you decide.
I was flattered.
Okay, fair
Stop
enough.
right there. So this is the thing, because we get accused of using the term socialism, and they say that's scare tactics. Like, we're not the only ones that use that term. They use that term. She just said she was flattered by that term. The term is literally in the title of what they believe, democratic socialism. I'll go over the difference between democratic socialism and, Soviet-style socialism in a second, but they continue on their conversation here.
The president spent a lot of time on using the S word, socialism and socialist. It was a not too subtle, I don't know whether it's a dig or a enhancement. I'll let you decide.
I was flattered.
Okay, fair enough. You have said you are a democratic socialist. Can you be a democratic socialist and a capitalist?
Well, I think it depends on your interpretation. So there are some democratic socialists that would say absolutely not. There are other people that are democratic socialists that would say, I think it's possible.
What are you?
Can you pause right there, Tom? So she's right. If you actually go to the definition that's put out on Wikipedia and on the actual Democratic Socialist page, they don't really believe in capitalism as we believe it. What their intent is what they called is they believe that there should be a collective ownership of the means of production. Okay, that's what they want. That's what they believe. What that means is there's no private ownership of the means of production that happens in a capitalist country. Now, the only reason that's really different than like Soviet-style socialism is top-down, where you have a dictatorship and a government direct everything. They look at it as sort of a bottom-up, where the government's still basically directing everything, but that government is accountable to the people. That's where the democratic term is. So it's better because, well, yeah, the government's still pretty much running everything, but it's accountable to the people, so it's okay. And people like me say, no, it's not okay. Even that way, even that if that's not straight dictatorship, it still is not as good as the capitalist system because it ruins real incentives and, of course, it ruins private property rights. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez isn't going to go that far in this conversation. She's going to nuance it a little bit and say capitalism's okay, but this is what she said.
I think.
Do you say to yourself, I'm a capitalist, but?
I don't say that.
Okay.
If anything, I would say I believe in a democratic economy, but.
Gotcha.
But the but is there.
Okay.
So in some ways, whether it's you're coming from, say, Elizabeth Warren's perspective, where she says things like, I'm a capitalist, but we need to have hard rules for the game.
What does the private sector do better than that the private sector... Look, government should stay out of X because the private sector does that better.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. There's a lot of consumer goods where the private sector works. And by the way, I think it's important to delineate that just because you're in the private sector doesn't... You can be in the private sector and be a democratically socialist business. Worker cooperatives are a perfect example of that.
Stop right there. Now, she talks about worker cooperatives. That's where workers are part of, the shareholders and the chairmen, all that stuff when it comes to shares in a business. And that does happen, and it does work sometimes. But what she's also talking about is Elizabeth Warren wants to pass a new law that would require workers be a part of the board of executives at a private business. But of course, who dictates how all that would work? Who would run that whole process? The government. The government would be deeply involved in implementing all that stuff. So it seems like, well, this is just the people getting more involved. It takes away private property rights from ownership, but it's still much too much government intervention in the private sector economy. Go ahead. Is that it, or is there more?
Not about government takeover. It's about how much do workers have a say in your business? Do you have workers on the board? Do workers enjoy a decent amount of the wealth that they are creating? Or is the majority of these profits going to shareholders while you're paying a worker $15 an hour to live in a New York City apartment? And so that, to me, is the difference. It's not that the public sector is democratically socialist and the private sector is not. It's really about a more nuanced understanding of how our economy should work.
But that's why you have shareholders. They're there to make money. And if you don't like the situation, become a shareholder.
Well, that's a good point, because a lot of times they look at Wall Street as kind of evil, and these rich shareholders are getting all the money. But who have investments in Wall Street? Majority of Americans with 401ks. How many millions of Americans in this country have 401ks? Where do you think the 401k gets the money? It gets the money from the investment in the market through shareholders. It's a free economy, and yes, you can buy shares all you want. But when you start implementing these top-down rules of, well, you have to pay an employee this much, you have to have these employees on the board of directors, you have to do this, you have to do this, it fundamentally disrupts how the market works. So minimum wage is a great example. You impose a higher minimum wage thinking this is great for workers, and intentions are good, but the effects are not always as good, because a lot of times they just lay off people, or the price of the products go up. So we say, we're paying workers more, we're forcing them to pay more, but then the prices of the products are more expensive, so it just evens itself out anyway.
So here comes price controls.
So yeah, and then that will be the next step. They have price controls, and of course that would be good intentions, but price controls have a negative effect as well, because it ruins how the market works. Prices are basically information on what it takes to produce a product and get it out to market, and how much they can make a profit on, all that stuff. And to say, well, we have price controls and that'll fix everything, the underlying philosophy of all this is still government control over large parts of the economy. It's the underlying philosophy of democratic socialism. Even if it's not the same thing as Soviet-style socialism, it's still what it is. So a lot of times what they will do is they will talk about the greatness of the Scandinavian countries, Norway, and all that stuff. But believe it or not, that's not really what Norway is or what Denmark is. Denmark actually has a free market economy, and some of their rules in terms of banking and other parts of the private sector are actually freer than the United States. They don't have as many regulations on some things. What they do have is big welfare states. So they tax their citizens a lot more, and then they use that tax money to have giant welfare states. So they have government intervention in the economy that way because they're having giant welfare states, but it's not like they're having government intervention in daily businesses like she wants to do with the new Green Deal. The only way you can have a Green New Deal system that she is proposing with all of these different mandates is complete overhaul of how our economy works and more government control over things in the economy. And people say, well, that's not government means of production. Trust me, that's where it's headed. That's the direction it's going. The government would be in the means of production. They say things like nationalized health care is not socialist. Yes, it is. Medicare for All is an insurance program by the government that's run by the government and owned by the government. How is that not the means of production when it comes to the healthcare industry? It is for the health insurance industry. And if you look at national health systems like they have in Britain, it literally is run and administered and owned by the government over there. That's not socialist? So they try to put a smiley face by saying, well, it's not the same thing. It's democratic socialism. The underlying philosophy, the fundamental philosophy is the same. Now, I wanted to shift gears a little bit. It's kind of on the same thing. You have Andrew Cuomo, who's the governor of New York. And all of a sudden, he's complaining now about the tax reform because rich people are leaving his state. And they're leaving the state because the taxes are too high. And he's blaming tax reform. But I want to go over this because it just shows what happens. It's a great example of good intentions. So they want to raise taxes because they want all of these social programs. And they think this is good intentions. But then it ends up backfiring because all the rich people then leave. So then they don't have the money for the social programs and their economy suffers. Here he is.
SALT was an economic civil war. It literally restructured the economy to help red states at the cost of blue states. That's exactly what it did. It was a diabolical political maneuver in the tax code that actually raised taxes on Democratic states, lowered taxes on Republican states, and financed the Republican state tax cut from the Democratic states. I mean, if people actually understood what it was that they were doing, there would have been an uprising. That is about a $2.3 billion drop in revenues. $2.3 billion as a drop at this point in revenues is as serious as a heart attack.
So the reason why they have a $2.3 billion drop in revenues is because the rich people are leaving that state and they're taking their money to states that don't have the high taxes. So instead of blaming his state's high taxes, because that's what it is, it's their state's high income taxes.
And how many people are here in Florida because of that?
Yeah. Instead of blaming his state's because we don't have a state income tax.
Right.
He blames the tax reform code. So this is what the tax reform did. He's saying it's unfair now because it hurts Democratic states. Actually, no, it's fair now. It was unfair before. Because what was happening is a lot of these states that had these high state income taxes, the people living in those states could deduct from their federal tax, so they had more money to pay their state income tax. So basically, we're subsidizing the states that don't have a state income tax. We're subsidizing the states who had higher state income taxes because we didn't get we didn't get the federal tax breaks. So they were not having to pay as much federal taxes because they had the high state income taxes. How is that fair? That's not fair. That means we're having to pay more federal income taxes because those states were stupid and had stupid policies that had higher state income taxes. So what the tax code did is got rid of a lot of those deductions. So they're actually paying in those states what they should be paying in the first place, instead of getting the special deal from the federal government so they could use their extra money to higher taxes at the state level. Tell me how that was fair. But that's, he spun it in a way that, this is helping Republicans. No, it's actually making it a better system. And if you want rich people to stay in your state, lower the income taxes, lower the local taxes you have there. That's how you do it. And then figure out a better way to run your government without all of those taxes. So I have another voice of reason of the day I'm going to get to, and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeartRadio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Yes, welcome back to the show. I am your voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. A special edition of Beyond Reason Radio. Tonight, when I started doing PM Orlando, which is on this station 5 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, people kept asking me, are you going to get rid of Beyond Reason? You can't stop Beyond Reason. So hopefully what I'm going to start doing is, if it's not on the air, I'll do a podcast, but we'll do it once a week. And we'll do Beyond Reason once a week, where it gives us a little bit of a chance to do more in-depth analysis of the news of the week. And I'll post it on the podcast page and other places on my Facebook, on Twitter as well, on the BeyondReasonRadio.com page. And so we'll get that out there because I know a lot of you liked that. One thing we used to do a lot on Beyond Reason, which I want to do right now, is we would find a voice of reason of the day. Well, I found a voice of reason, and he's been a voice of reason before, and I thought this was really interesting. It's Judge Napolitano from Fox. Now, it's kind of old news now. I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago, not even, but, a couple of weeks is like 1,000 years in this news cycle. But the whole Roger Stone thing, which we covered on PM Orlando when it happened, Roger Stone was arrested by the FBI. And I'm no fan of Roger Stone. Judge Napolitano isn't a fan of Roger Stone. But he makes a good point on how it all went about, and it makes you question what the real motivation was behind it. I think he's right about this. This is what he said.
It was an American nightmare when 29 FBI agents in 17 vehicles, SUVs, and 2 armored vehicles, and 2 amphibious vehicles, and a helicopter descended on the home of Roger Stone in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with sirens blaring and lights flashing at 6 o'clock in the morning in order to arrest the longtime friend of President Donald Trump. Stone had, of course, been indicted the day before by one of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's grand juries, the one sitting in Washington, D.C., for lying to Congress, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Stone was represented by counsel throughout the grand jury and Mueller's investigation of him, and Mueller's people certainly knew who his lawyers were. He wasn't charged with a crime of violence. He wasn't a flight risk. He doesn't have a passport, an active passport, and he's doesn't have a criminal record. So what was the reason for this tremendous show of force? Unless it was to create the impression amongst potential jurors that he's probably guilty, otherwise the government wouldn't have done this, or to terrify him, as it certainly did. After the banging on the front door, when he came there at 6 in the morning, he was confronted by 2 automatic rifles pointed at his head. This is jackboots in America, and it has no place in American life. Certainly not when the person being arrested could have been summoned by a phone call. If you don't take my word for this, you could take the word of the federal judge before whom he appeared 3 hours later, who said, "You're free to go on your own signature. I'm not even going to ask for any bail."
So, I mean, that totally makes sense to me. I'm not saying Roger Stone is innocent. I think he probably is guilty of the things he's accused of, which were mostly process crimes. But why the giant FBI, invasion of his home? What was the purpose of that? If not maybe to send a message or intimidate? It just seemed completely unnecessary for all the reasons Judge Napolitano said. We only have a couple of minutes here, but I know some people wanted to do this. It is that time of the show, if you remember, once again. Yes, things that make Yaffee Laffy. Things that make Yaffee Laffy. So, I mean, I could just read word for word the Green New Deal.
Oh, jeez.
It would take like an hour.
Yeah.
It is a lot, but that would probably be enough to make me laugh because it made a lot of people laugh this past week.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one thing, our friends at the Babylon Bee, once again, I had to find something there. They have a story here. I think it's serious. Imaginary superhero Captain Planet, something I used to watch as a kid, criticizes Green New Deal for being unrealistic. So Captain Planet, the environmental superhero cartoon, yeah, he's not even happy with it either. He says, frankly, this proposal just isn't realistic at all. So the imaginary cartoon hero, it would probably be a lot more plausible if the Dems would just try to summon me using the magic rings of 5 diverse teenagers. That would definitely be a lot more achievable than eliminating cows, cars, and airplanes by next week. We believe the Democrats need to go back to the drawing board and come up with something more realistic. Oh, man, I love the guys at the Babylon Bee. By the way, I also got a message from someone on Facebook who said instead of MAGA, the new slogan, M-A-G-A, Make America Great Again, it should be MABA, which is Make Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Make Alexandria Bartend Again. So there you go on that. Things that made Yaffee Laffy. And I didn't just read the whole Green New Deal for you. So Beyond Reason Radio, it's been a while since we have done this show. Another one in the books. An hour actually went by pretty fast. I'm kind of surprised. I think I'm going to go home and sleep now if that's okay. But I'll see you guys Monday, 5 p.m. for another edition of PM Orlando, of course. And we'll be back next week sometime for another edition of Beyond Reason Radio. Catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. And I'll catch you guys next time.